This is the moment Finesse2Tymes stopped talking like an artist and started talking like a man trapped in a system he can't escape. A man literally begging on record, asking, "What do I need to do to get out of this contract?" And what makes it even crazier is, the whole world heard it. Not in private. Not through lawyers. Not behind closed doors. But loud, emotional, unfiltered right in front of cameras, microphones, and the internet. And then 50 Cent steps in. Out of nowhere, the rap mogul who built an empire off strategy, controversy, and power moves sees an opportunity most people wouldn't even touch. While others stay quiet, 50 Cent does what he always does, he moves. But the real question is this help, or is this a takeover in disguise? Because when Finesse starts exposing details about contracts, lawyers, managers, and industry manipulation, the entire story shifts. This is no longer just about music. This is about control, ownership, and a young artist who feels like he signed his freedom away without understanding the game. And now the internet is watching every move, every word, every response. Because if 50 Cent really gets involved, this situation doesn't just change for Finesse2Tymes. It changes the entire power balance in the industry. So the question is simple. Did Finesse just call for help? Or did he just trigger one of the biggest industry shakeups we've seen in years? And what happens next could either free him or trap him even deeper. The moment Finesse2Tymes said those words, it didn't feel like entertainment anymore. It felt like pressure finally spilling out in real time. A raw confession that he could no longer dress up with music, interviews, or image control. Because when a man starts publicly asking how to get out of a contract in front of the entire internet, it usually means the situation behind the scenes has already gone way further than people realize. And that's exactly what fans started picking up on instantly. The tone in his voice wasn't confident, it wasn't promotional, it wasn't even strategic. It sounded like frustration mixed with urgency. Like someone who has already tried every private door and is now knocking on the public one because nothing else worked. What made it even louder was the way he kept referencing names, conversations, and meetings. He wasn't speaking in vague industry talk. He was pointing directly at people involved. Talking about Baby J, talking about who he worked with, who he didn't, and how communication kept getting broken or delayed. Every sentence felt like another layer being peeled off a deal that was supposed to be structured, but now looks emotionally and financially complicated. In the background of all this, the internet didn't waste a second. Clips started circulating with captions like, "He's trapped," and "something deeper going on." Others were more skeptical, saying this could be frustration or negotiation tactics being played out publicly. But the one thing nobody could deny was that this didn't look like normal label tension anymore. This looked personal. And that's where the mob ties conversation started gaining traction again. Not because anything new was officially confirmed, but because of how Finesse was speaking. When he said things like, "Let me out the contract," and "What do I have to do?" it immediately triggered speculation about whether this was just business friction or something far more serious involving leverage, control, and industry pressure. The moment those words hit social media, people started connecting dots in real time. Old interviews resurfaced. Past comments about management deals started circulating again. Fans began analyzing every line like it was evidence in a case file. And in that chaos, one name started dominating the conversation: 50 Cent. Because everyone knows how 50 moves in situations like this. He doesn't just comment. He calculates. If he steps into a situation, there is usually a reason behind it that goes beyond surface-level support. So when his name entered the discussion, the entire energy shifted from industry drama to possible intervention. But before that even fully developed, Finesse was still speaking. Still explaining. Still trying to make people understand that his frustration wasn't about fame or money alone. It was about control over his own output. He started breaking down how music release issues, label clearance problems, and internal disagreements were affecting his ability to operate freely as an artist. And that's where things got more layered. Because from the outside, fans just see songs, releases, and social media posts. But inside the industry, contracts can determine everything from when you drop music to how you monetize it, to even what you are allowed to say publicly. And when those systems start blocking movement, artists often feel exactly what Finesse was expressing in that moment: stuck. Then came the deeper emotional shift in his delivery. He started talking less like a performer and more like someone reflecting on trust. He mentioned loyalty, relationships, and how certain expectations were used during the signing process. That's when the tone turned from frustration to realization. Because once an artist starts saying things like, "I didn't understand," or "I thought it was different," it signals something important. It means the business relationship they entered into is no longer matching the reality they are living in. And that gap between expectation and reality is where most industry conflicts begin. He also touched on something that immediately caught attention: how he believed certain deals were partnerships, but later felt like the structure didn't reflect equal power. That single idea is what fueled most of the online debate. Was he misled? Was it misunderstanding? Or is this just how the industry operates at a level most people don't see? While all this was unfolding, clips of his statements were being broken down across platforms. Some focused on his legal confusion. Others focused on his emotional tone. And some focused purely on the mob ties connection rumors, even though nothing official confirmed that angle. But in internet culture, perception often spreads faster than facts. And that perception started building a narrative: an artist trying to break free, a system that doesn't easily let go, and external forces possibly stepping in. That's where 50 Cent's involvement started becoming more than just commentary. People began treating it like a possible solution, a way out, or at least a power counterbalance in a situation that felt one-sided from the outside. But even with all that speculation building, Finesse kept circling back to one core message. He didn't want conflict, he wanted resolution. He wasn't asking for sympathy. He was asking for structure that he could actually move within. A way to continue his career without feeling restricted by agreements he now views differently than when he signed them. And that's what made the moment so powerful online. Because it wasn't delivered like a press statement. It wasn't polished. It wasn't filtered through PR. It was direct, emotional, and messy in the way real disputes usually are before lawyers fully take over. But the biggest shift came at the end of his message cycle. Because once an artist starts publicly calling for release from a contract, everything after that becomes irreversible. Either the situation gets resolved behind closed doors, or it escalates into something much more public and much more complicated. And right as that realization starts settling in for viewers, the conversation moves to the next question nobody can ignore anymore. If 50 Cent really steps in fully, what happens next? And that's exactly where things start getting dangerous in a completely different way. Because once Finesse2Tymes put that level of frustration into the open, it stopped being just an internal label issue and turned into something the entire industry could now see, interpret, and potentially react to. And in situations like this, silence is never just silence. It's usually strategy. The internet didn't wait for confirmation of anything. The moment the clip circulated, people immediately started assigning roles. Finesse became the artist trying to break free, the label became the structure holding him down, and everyone else suddenly became either a possible ally or a possible obstacle. But the real shift happened when the conversation moved from emotion to power. Because contracts in the music industry aren't just paperwork. They're leverage systems. They decide who controls distribution, who owns masters, who approves releases, and who benefits financially over time. And when an artist publicly questions that structure, it forces everyone connected to that deal into a very uncomfortable spotlight. Now, whether everything Finesse said is fully accurate or emotionally amplified, the perception alone is enough to trigger industry attention. And that's where names like 50 Cent start entering the conversation with weight. Because 50 isn't new to this type of narrative. He's built his entire public persona around understanding contracts, leverage, disputes, and turning industry conflict into opportunity. So when fans started tagging him, mentioning him, and pushing the idea that he should step in, it didn't feel random anymore. It felt like setup. And then something shifted. Not officially. Not in a press release. Not in a structured announcement. But in the way the conversation started spreading. People began treating the situation like it had two possible outcomes: Either Finesse resolves it internally, or an external force steps in and changes the entire trajectory. That's when speculation about help started turning into speculation about movement. Because if someone like 50 Cent gets involved in any capacity, whether business, advisory, or entertainment opportunity, it changes leverage instantly. Even the perception of that involvement can shift negotiations behind closed doors. And that's where things get tricky. Because in these environments, help is never just help. It usually comes with structure, terms, and expectations. Nothing is ever purely emotional at that level. Everything has layers. Meanwhile, Finesse continued expressing frustration about music release barriers. He talked about how difficult it is to move freely when clearance, approvals, and internal decisions are controlled by multiple layers of business authority. To fans, it sounded like blockage. To industry people, it sounded like standard contractual structure being challenged publicly. But regardless of interpretation, the emotional tone stayed consistent. He wanted out, or at least wanted change. And that consistency is what kept the conversation alive. Because when someone is just ranting, the internet moves on quickly. But when someone keeps returning to the same core issue with clarity and repetition, people start paying attention differently. It becomes less like a moment and more like a situation developing in real time. Then came the shift in audience reaction. Some viewers started defending him heavily, saying artists often get trapped in deals they don't fully understand at the time of signing. Others pushed back, arguing that contracts are legal agreements and responsibility still exists regardless of emotional frustration later on. That split is what turned this from gossip into debate. And in the middle of that debate, the idea of intervention became the hottest topic. Because once 50 Cent's name is attached to a situation like this, whether directly or indirectly, people start imagining outcomes. Would he offer a deal? Would he provide a platform? Would he negotiate leverage? Or would he simply observe and use the moment as industry commentary? Nobody knows yet, but the speculation alone changes the temperature of the entire situation. And that's important, because in entertainment, perception often moves faster than legal reality. Behind the scenes, situations like this usually don't resolve in public. Lawyers get involved, conversations get quieter, and the public only sees the outcome much later. But this case is different because Finesse brought it into public space first. That changes everything. Once something becomes public, it becomes harder to control privately. And now every move either side makes is being interpreted by thousands of people watching in real time. Even neutral statements are being analyzed. Even silence is being interpreted. Even unrelated posts are being connected back to the situation. That's how fast narrative spreads when emotion, contracts, and celebrity collide. At the same time, the mob ties speculation continued floating around online, even without confirmation. And in internet culture, once a narrative gains momentum, it doesn't need proof to survive. It only needs engagement. But the more grounded reality is this. What Finesse is dealing with is a common but complicated industry situation: artist versus structure, creative freedom versus contractual obligation, emotion versus legal reality. And those situations don't get solved through viral moments alone. They get solved through negotiation, legal review, and sometimes uncomfortable compromise. Still, the wild card in this entire scenario remains external influence. Because when a figure like 50 Cent is even loosely associated with a situation, it introduces unpredictability. And unpredictability is what changes outcomes. So now the industry is watching. Fans are watching. And Finesse is still at the center of it, having already said out loud what most artists only say behind closed doors. But what happens next isn't about what was said. It's about who responds and how much power they actually bring to the table when they do. And that right there is where things stop looking like just industry talk and start looking like a full-blown power shift happening in real time. Because once 50 Cent publicly steps into a situation like this, it's never just advice anymore. It becomes influence. It becomes leverage. And in this case, it becomes a possible escape route that a lot of people didn't think Finesse2Tymes would ever even have. Now think about the position he's in. You've got an artist tied up in a contract he's openly frustrated with, publicly calling out confusion, miscommunication, and what he believes are unfair business practices. And then on the other side, you've got one of the most strategic minds in entertainment stepping in with something completely different: opportunity instead of confrontation. That's the first major shift here. Because in this industry, most people don't offer exits, they offer silence. But 50 didn't do that. He offered a ladder out, and that alone changed the temperature of the entire conversation. And let's be real for a second, this isn't just about music anymore. This is about control. This is about ownership. This is about whether an artist feels trapped inside a system or empowered inside one. And when Finesse starts speaking about contracts, lawyers, miscommunication, and not fully understanding what he signed while coming out of a bid, that's where the story hits a deeper layer. Because now it's not just industry drama, it's a classic case of someone learning the business the hard way. And that's exactly what fans are picking up on. They're not just watching a rapper vent. They're watching someone try to mentally untangle a system they feel locked into. Now here's where 50 Cent's move becomes even more strategic. He doesn't say, fight the label. He doesn't say, sue them. He doesn't say, break the contract. He says, I'll put you in a position to earn your way out. That's a completely different philosophy. Because instead of war, he's offering mobility. Instead of confrontation, he's offering production, visibility, and revenue generation through acting opportunities. And that's what makes this so powerful, because it's not emotional, it's tactical. But of course, the internet didn't miss the deeper implications either. People immediately started connecting dots. If Finesse accepts something like this, what does that mean for his current deal? What happens to the relationships behind the scenes? And more importantly, what kind of reaction does that trigger from the people currently holding his contract? Because in this business, nothing exists in isolation. Every move has a countermove. Every opportunity has a consequence. And every public statement becomes evidence in somebody's mental ledger. Now let's talk about Finesse's own words, because that's where the tension really builds. He's not just frustrated, he's confused about structure. He's questioning lawyers, management, partnerships, royalties, and who actually controls what. And when an artist starts breaking down deals like that in public, it signals something important. Trust has already started to erode. And once trust erodes in entertainment contracts, the relationship is never the same again. You can hear it in the way he talks. It's not just anger. It's realization. It's the moment somebody starts understanding how the game actually works after already being inside it for years. And that's why 50's timing matters so much here. Because he didn't jump in at the beginning of the frustration. He stepped in when it had already peaked. That's not coincidence. That's awareness of narrative timing. Now, behind all of this, there's another layer fans are paying attention to: influence. Because 50 Cent stepping into this doesn't just help Finesse, it sends a message to every artist watching. It says, there are other routes. There are exits. There are alternatives to traditional label dependency. And in 2026, that message hits harder than ever. Streaming is unstable. Labels are restructuring. Artists are questioning ownership more than they ever have. So when a high-profile figure publicly offers a workaround, people don't just see generosity, they see strategy. Now, the mob ties angle is where things get even more sensitive. Because anytime contracts, management, and public frustration collide, speculation starts building around how those relationships will respond. Not necessarily publicly, but internally. And the industry is very aware of that. Nobody ignores a public challenge to a deal structure. Nobody ignores a viral clip of an artist saying, "Let me out." Because even if nothing changes immediately, perception already has. And perception in this business is often more powerful than paperwork. Meanwhile, fans are split right down the middle. Some are saying Finesse is finally getting clarity and should take control of his career. Others are warning that switching lanes publicly like this can create long-term industry tension that doesn't just disappear with one opportunity. And both sides, honestly, have a point. Because yes, opportunity is opportunity. But loyalty, contracts, and business relationships don't reset just because a better offer appears online. That's not how the industry works. Now here's the real question this situation forces everyone to ask. Is this actually an escape plan, or just another layer of the same game? Because when 50 Cent offers a role instead of a release, he's still operating within the system, just a different part of it. Film, television, production, that's still industry structure. It's just a different doorway. And Finesse has to decide whether that doorway leads to freedom or simply another contract under a different name. And that decision is not small. It's career-defining. Because whatever he chooses will signal how he navigates every future deal from this point forward. But regardless of outcome, one thing is already undeniable. This situation has shifted his narrative. He's no longer just an artist talking about music. He's now at the center of a broader conversation about artist independence, contract literacy, and industry control. And those conversations don't fade quickly once they go viral. They stick. They follow. They shape perception. And now, all eyes are on what happens next. Because 50 Cent has already made his move. The internet has already picked sides. And Finesse2Tymes is now in a position where his next decision won't just affect his music, it'll define how people see his entire career trajectory moving forward. So the question isn't just whether he accepts the help. The real question is whether this becomes the moment he breaks out, or the moment another layer gets added to the same system he's trying to escape.